Welcome to another Fenestration Canada podcast.
This podcast is a presentation of Quanex Building Products. This is Tech Talks, live conversations about the regulatory environment with Al Yagalis.
So welcome everyone. We're now live for Tech Talks episode 3. I want to start by thanking our sponsor, Quanex Building Products, proud sponsor of Tech Talks. So Al, if you can come in, we have Al Yagalis with us this week again. In 2 seconds, here he is. So Al,
everyone.
I understand that this week we're gonna discuss installation.
Yes, today's topic is installation issues, and this is a subject that I've, from time to time, speaking to manufacturers, it comes up as a greater or lesser concern, depending where you are in the country. One of the things that's interesting in Canada is that even though we have a national building code that applies from coast to coast, and we have a national installation standard in CSA A40.4, we also have building practices that vary quite a bit by the region that we're in. And in effect, it's my impression that we don't really have a uniform approach to installing windows and doors across the country. And I'm not suggesting that we should have a uniform one-size-fits-all installation method, but those variations can make it challenging, and I think there is different levels of understanding as we go across the country. Another challenge is that we don't really have a formal training program for window installation. It's not a trade that is regulated. On the commercial fenestration side, we have Red Seal glazier training programs with curriculums that are more standardized across the country, and there's a recognized kind of body of knowledge that is passed on to the installers. But when it comes to residential windows and doors, historically, we just haven't had that level of training or education. But as the walls that we build that we install windows in become more complicated, as we have tried to start building more and more energy efficient housing, the need to control air leakage, the need to control water penetration, the potential risk to the wall of even minor leaks of water penetration or minor leaks of warm air into a highly insulated wall can cause major problems. And so I think the progress of more energy efficient building codes has actually contributed to the complexity of window installation, because it's very important now to connect the critical barriers in the wall to the window product in a way that doesn't compromise the performance of the product or the wall. So in this kind of environment, we have manufacturers that have different challenges, and some maybe don't have challenges in specific, but we had some questions related to what may be some of your concerns related to window and door installation. And you'll see the question of the day that you can vote on, the issues that concern you, if any of these apply to you. I'm sure there are companies who mainly install what they sell in their local area. And when they have complete control of the installation process, they probably don't have a lot of installation related problems. But some companies, are selling through a distribution network, and the parties that install the product do not have any direct line of communication, sometimes with the manufacturer. And so in these cases, products that are not correctly installed can cause a lot of problems, because who's going to service that problem when it occurs? So for some companies, there are challenges here. Another matter is that, we're seeing larger windows and more complicated fenestration arrangements. The market is wanting a lot more glass and a lot bigger windows and doors and products. And installing those products can be more challenging than just a typical fixed or sliding window with a nail flange installation. So comments that I've heard as well is that companies feel that they have too many service calls related to improperly installed windows, and that can be a real headache if you have to manage and take care of the problems that are caused by other parties. I've heard comments such as, installers are not provided with the proper installation instructions by my customer, or they disregard any information that we provide. One manufacturer I talked to says that one of their major problems is installation related. They sell, to large projects, to even sometimes Part 3 buildings or large Part 9 buildings, and there are products. They often are facing operational problems related to the products just not being installed correctly. So this can be a real challenge. And some manufacturers have said that when problems arise from window installation, the installers are unavailable or do not make an honest effort to deal with it. Again, these are not problems across the board, and we're not trying to slam the people that install windows, from coast to coast. But these are some of the challenges that manufacturers have brought up to us, Steph.
Understood. So I see we already have questions. I want to take the opportunity again to mention that anyone who wants to join in and speak over the phone or their computer and talk live with Al and myself, you can do so by pressing your little button at the bottom of your screen. You just raise your hand and we'll know that you want to speak with us. For now, we have a question from Patrick, who's asking, should we be trying to seal her all up, or allowing air pressure to equalize rain screen style?
Could you just read that question again, Steph?
Yeah, maybe I could ask Pat to come in. So from what I understand, CE wants in. I knew it. So just give me 1 second. Okay, Pat, you should be in.
Hi, Al. How you doing?
Good.
Sorry about that. Yeah,
I didn't know you were a window installer.
Yeah, I of course I'm not, but I have just so many questions burning in my mind at all times, Al. Just wondered what you thought of that strategy of, out here in Ontario, we like to seal everything up as much as we can and keep all the water out of the interface. You've seen Jan Eeks running around with his idea for a sort of a rain screen system where you balance, it's still in its formative stages, but where you balance out the air pressure, and that seems to keep water out of the interface, and there's a lot less ingress. What do you think? Is there any promise in that approach?
Well, I think there's a lot to recommend it. Pretty much the standard installation method these days in BC is a waterproof membrane, a flexible waterproof membrane at the sill. The air barrier materials are returned into the rough opening on all four sides of a product, and all the joints in those membranes are sealed, so that essentially there's no possibility for water to get into the wall within the rough opening. And then the window is caulked on all four sides on the inside of the rough opening. All the enclosure consultants are using details like that. And that approach is pretty standard. And essentially what you're trying to do is minimize air leakage at the back of the window, where that rod and caulk seal connects to the both to the sill membrane that has come into the window and also to the Tyvek or whatever other air barrier material you have. And the thinking there is that if you provide as good an air seal as you can on the inside of the window, it's going to be very difficult to suck water all the way from the front of the window to the back of the window and through that small failure of that inner air seal. And the thinking behind that kind of installation method is that if you're trying to seal the face of the window to the wall as well as you can, Realistically, you're always going to have imperfections in that seal, whether it's on the inside or the outside. But if you're trying to make the seal on the outside of the window, that's where the water is, and that's where the wind pressure changes. So you don't want this failure of the seal where there's going to be high velocity air pushing inwards. You don't want that to occur where the water is. It would be much better if that small failure occurred farther in, where you're not going to be able to suck water all the way back into the back of the rough opening. So conceptually, that's this pressure equalized idea. You want a better air seal on the inside of your window than you're going to have on the outside of your window. So that if the inside of the window is more airtight in the wall than the outside of the window, then you will not have forces able to push water that far into the wall. So that's the kind of approach I think Jan is getting at. But he's also trying to address concerns in many parts of the country, is that if you have this drainage cavity around the window where, that's great, we're going to let water not get into that wall, but now we have this uninsulated gap on the window. That's going to cause problems. And his research project is basically to address the challenge. Some people are saying, hey, that's good for BC, but that's not going to work in Ontario. It's not going to work in Saskatchewan. It's not going to work in Nova Scotia. It's not going to work in the Yukon or Manitoba. So, and so his research is really to try and understand, is that air gap going to be a problem? And if it is going to be a problem, is there a way to provide insulation in that air gap to reduce heat loss while still allowing drainage to take place, while still allowing this kind of pressure equalized installation method to be used? And basically, he wants to answer the question: is there going to be a problem using this method in a cold climate? And does this kind of a method have to be modified for a cold climate by adding insulation in a way that doesn't compromise the performance of the installation? So it's an interesting research project he's engaged in. He wants to basically extend or add to the work that the Natural Research Council has done. And we're hoping that it will lead to some, new insights for us about the use of that kind of installation method in cold climates. Did I answer your question, Pat?
You absolutely did. Thanks, Al. You've got a whole lot more coming in here on the chat, so you better. I'll let you get to those.
Thanks, Pat. Okay, so we have Richard, who made a comment here. He says there is very little to no enforcement on the issue, even at the permitting stage. So I guess we can all relate to that. I don't know if you have anything to add to this, Al.
Well, there probably isn't a lot of code enforcement on the installation, and that can vary. I know that several years ago I was doing some involved with some work at the city of Vancouver, and it was clear that in certain jurisdictions the building officials were expecting a certain installation method, and they were actually inspecting that method. But I think it can be difficult to inspect window installation because depending when the building inspector arrives, they arrive at the job site at certain stages like, framing, drywall, other stages. And when they come, they're not necessarily able to see important details of the installation. The other challenge is that we don't really have, I think, a uniform understanding of what a good installation should be. Okay. We have Part 9 of the code gets into installation, and it has certain requirements for planes of protection and subsoil flashings and so on, but those are not actually followed in large parts of the country. We also have the A440.4 standard, which has a lot of good information in it, but it's a highly technical document. And we don't have any educational programs that kind of take that content and lay it out to installers and other parties to help them understand it better. So it's difficult to enforce something that we don't have a coast to coast a really good understanding of, or even agreement on, what is the right way to do things.
We have Richard asking, should insulating in the RO be at the cold or warm side of the wall?
On the cold or warm side of the wall. Well, generally, you want insulation materials to be kind of in the same plane in the wall. But I don't know if the question is related to the fact if you've got an exterior insulated wall, should you be doing something different?
Okay. Well, maybe we could ask Richard if you want to precise or even call in, then we could maybe have a discussion about it to answer your question better. Okay. So we have Sarb asking, well, it's another comment I would feel. I feel that we don't have enough training programs for window installers, especially in BC. So that's something, that's another thing that we hear a lot.
Right. I'm looking at his question here. Well, that could be. I guess, Sarb is a manufacturer in BC, basically saying that, framers are installing windows and they don't necessarily have the knowledge to prepare the rough opening properly. This is exactly the kind of feedback, that's what he's seeing, right? He's installing in BC and he's seeing that the framers, for example, don't get it. And you can't expect a framer really to understand the details of a window installation. I think the nail flange did something very good to the industry and something not so good to the industry.
Okay.
When the nail flange was introduced in the 50s, maybe with early aluminum windows, somebody got the bright idea, if we just extrude that nail flange on the window, it's just so simple and easy to install. And you can literally just, take that window. At the time, the windows weren't that large. They were single glazed. They were easy to handle. And yes, you could nail the thing right directly to the wall. And at the time, all you had for barriers in the wall was tar paper, sheathing paper. And we really didn't control air leakage in the walls. We didn't insulate them very well. And we didn't realize that those walls leaked, but they did leak. We never had problems because we heated the walls and we dried them out. And so, we didn't know how badly our window installations were leaking because we weren't seeing rotting walls until the 90s when we started putting these air barrier materials on the outside of the wall. And ended up with a situation where you've got, poly on the inside, and then you've got something like Tyvek on the outside or some other barrier, and there's holes. There shouldn't be holes in the Tyvek, but there were. Water would get into the wall, and now you have wood in a plastic bag full of water, and it begins to rot. And it's only when we started trying to build more energy efficient walls that the problems with our installation method became evident. But the reality is that, framers have been in the habit of taking nail flange window and, nailing them to the wall. And that used to be, it used to work. But an installation today has to take account of what we call critical barriers. You have a vapor barrier, you have an air barrier, and unfortunately, you can build the walls in different ways. You can put the air barrier in different places. You can use the drywall on the inside as the air barrier. And with all the variations in how we build walls, with now we start adding exterior insulation and other things, somebody has to understand the role of the critical barriers and install the critical barriers correctly. And we don't even have a coast-to-coast program to train window installers, and certainly framers and carpenters and laborers on a job site are not trained to do that. So this is a challenge, and this is a challenge that I think as an industry we'll have to come to grips with. But perhaps we should take a few more comments from folks.
Yeah. So I saw that Richard wanted to talk and specify his and precise his thought, but I see he wrote something. So, but I'll move forward with the other questions. And Richard, if you want to talk with us, just raise your hand again. I just want to make sure before I patch you in. We have Terry saying, "Good morning, Al. We're seeing an increase in windows pushing inward to the wall center. Typical anchorage is a metal install strap. With large systems, we have seen increased product movement, twisting, etc. Are you seeing any of this or solutions to address it?"
So I'm wondering if Terry could maybe clarify on that. Like, so I'll address this question a little bit here.
Okay.
So yes, as we get to exterior insulated walls or more highly insulated walls, it's becoming from an energy point of view, the building designers are trying to align the window not with the outside face of the sheathing, but trying to have it closer to the center line of the insulation, because that's the most efficient thermally, the most efficient place to put the window. And so at that point, the nail flange installation is no longer practical, and metal strap anchors are often used. Now, strap anchors can be a very good thing, but they can also be a less good thing. Potentially, I guess what Terry's saying is that he's seeing products actually, once they're anchored with strap anchors, moving and twisting. I can't say that I have seen this. I used to work for a company where we did use metal strap anchors to anchor our windows, but we didn't have any problems with the windows moving or being flexible in the rough opening. But we addressed that by using enough anchors for the job, and we actually did our NAFS testing with the strap anchors in the lab, so that we could validate their performance and the way they worked.
Okay.
So I suppose if people are using strap anchors but they've never actually tested that installation, and if the rough opening gaps are quite large, the strap anchor may not be able to handle that large rough opening. I think there needs to be some, I think manufacturers, they need to ensure that if you're going to use a strap anchor, it's going to be able to do the job. So I can't say that I have been exposed to problem strap anchor installations. I do know that a number of manufacturers use them and use them very effectively. And as I said, we used to test products with PG ratings up to 50 and 60 and 70 PSF, and did it with the strap anchors. And we knew that was a good, reliable, solid way. I mean, you also have to involve shims as well. So really, I really can't say more on that. I don't think the problem is inherent in the strap anchor, but whenever you change installation methods, you need to ensure that they're able to do the job. So
okay, we have Richard now that's ready to precise his point of view here. So Richard, I think you're with us now. I don't know if you're speaking. I can't hear you. Oh wait, you're muted.
How about now? We got me?
Yep.
There we go.
You're in.
Thank you very much. Al, welcome to FEN Canada.
Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, just wanted to elaborate on my earlier question regarding the installation. We provide and manufacture, supply and install and make recommendations on the installation. And one of the questions I'm getting more and more of with regards to energy efficiency of the window is, where do we insulate? Do we spray foam the cold side 2 inches? Do we spray foam the interior on the jamb extension 2 inches? Or do we do the whole cavity? It's again, with the energy efficiency growing in popularity, that's one of the questions that's being posed to me.
I see. Okay, so I think, if you're in a part of the building code basically specifies which areas require two planes of protection and subsill flashing. That's on the basis of moisture index and another parameter in the code. So if you're building in an area where you are required to have two planes of protection and a subsill flashing, then the intent of the code is that you have a cavity that allows water to drain. And if that is the case, then I think it makes sense. Now, assuming that your air barrier is on the warm side of the window, then it would make sense to locate your insulation closer to the warm side of the window, because in that case, the potential for water penetration is going to be on the cold side of the window. So if water is going to get in around your nail flanges or behind your building papers, if it's going to find some way into that window rough opening and you want it to drain out again, it's going to be entering from the outside. And if you put your insulation on the outside, you might actually impede the ability to control and drain that water. So it seems logical to me that then that if you're going to insulate part of that cavity, not all of it, that you would do that on the warm side of the window. And I suspect that it would be sufficient in most parts of the country to apply that insulation, not necessarily in the whole cavity, but the part of the cavity towards the warm side of the window. That would make sense. That would allow you to respect the code's requirement for a cavity that can drain the water where it enters, and also to reduce the heat flow from the inside to the outside by putting some insulating foam on the warm side. That seems logical to me. What do you think,
Right.
Richard?
Yeah, no, it does. It does make some sense, certainly, that I can convey. If I may be so bold as to expand on that, in the creation of a sill pan flashing that captures and drains, as I'm sure you'll agree, I'm finding a tremendous amount of builders, building science professionals that will create a sill pan in accordance with the A440, and then they insist on spray foaming that entire cavity, believing that that's the correct method or the correct approach to be taken. Could you shed any light on that kind of philosophy out there?
Well, to my mind, that doesn't really make sense, that you would fill the entire cavity, because then you're not dealing with the ability of that cavity to drain. I think realistically, if you're going to get water penetration from the exterior side of the window through the around the flanges and so on, it would make sense that you would leave at least a couple of inches there uninsulated, so that at the place where water could get in, you don't have the foam in the way. If you try to foam the whole thing, you may actually have water traveling by capillary action,
Right.
in and around the foam and things like that. So it just seems to me that, foaming the entire cavity front to back is probably not necessary. And it kind of conflicts with the purpose of the second plane of protection. First, the drainable cavity
Right.
around the window, it kind of conflicts with that requirement of the code. And I don't think that it's, you don't necessarily have to eliminate, you don't have to invalidate that part
Yeah.
of the installation by trying to improve the thermal transfer. So
Would you agree that perhaps more important to stop the through wall airflow at that sill area by sealing it off on the interior side, vapor barrier, jam extension, than it is to provide any kind of an R value to that cavity?
I don't know if we could get into what's more or less important here. I think it's critically important to have your air barrier on the inside of the window to prevent moist air from entering the cavity around the window. So I think that's really important.
Okay.
It's interesting that the NRC, when they did their studies of this, two plane of protection wall installation method, they actually explored the condensation potential of an uninsulated cavity. And in what they did, they actually had a hot cold wall thermal setup done in that research, and they did not find a measurable a measurable difference in the frame temperatures, the window frame temperature and wall temperature around that window that would lead to condensation. Now, I don't know at what environmental conditions they did that study, but when they explored that method of installation, they did address that concern by testing, and they found that the uninsulated cavity did not meaningfully lead to condensation problems on the inside. If you're doing a therm file of the heat transfer through that wall and you feel you need insulation, then by all means add some insulation. But if you're going to the level of a therm file, you could see, will a couple inches of insulation be enough, or how much benefit do you actually get from insulating the whole cavity from front to back? You may find that it's not that necessary.
I got a whole host of questions, but I'll let somebody else chime in. Al, thank you very much.
Thanks, Richard. So we have a question on the chat that I just saw. I'll just remind people, if you want to ask a question and want to make sure that we see them, use the Q&A function. And also, I just want to let you know that you can still vote for the question of the day. So we have a question here from Mark. He's saying, in addition to the larger complex windows, there is the added challenge of adding dark colors to these products. This provides further movement in the combination. What further guidance can be offered surrounding installation?
So Mark is concerned about heat and dark colored products. In my experience, with vinyl windows, the heat buildup tends to occur more in the outer skin of the window than it does all the way through the frame. So I don't know to what extent, but there are several forces at work when it comes to vinyl windows. Clearly, temperature changes do result in expansion and contraction of the framing material. But typically, windows on the indoor side are don't vary greatly in temperature year-round, because the building is heated in the winter, and the material is quite insulative. And the temperature changes are taking place more on the outer part of the window. One of the phenomena that can happen, though, with vinyl is that if you overheat the material, it wants to shrink, and that's a permanent shrinkage. It's sometimes called the reversion shrinkage. Basically, if you heat the PVC to a certain temperature, the stresses that are in the extruded product kind of want to relax, and that can result in some permanent deformation to products. So, but I'm not sure that I have seen the kind of thing that our caller is asking about, and I wonder if he could provide some more detail to that question.
Okay, so Mark, if you want to come in with us on the show, just use your raise hand button, and I'll patch you in. So in the meantime, we have Terry with another question here. With BC dropping the A440.4, it advises that details to be provided by the manufacturer, which in his he thinks that this would be a terrible idea. First, do you know why they did this, and would it be wise to look for a single source for this, envelope engineer's specification paper or something?
It's funny. I have heard that the reason they dropped it is because of the cost of having to supply all the building inspectors with copies of the A440.4 standard.
Okay.
I can't definitively say that was the reason, but I know that when the reason was presented, it didn't sound like they had a great reason for that. Okay. There might have been other concerns as well. But I see Terry's point. You look at the BC Building Code, and all it says about installation is to follow the manufacturer's instructions. And I think that I can see where a manufacturer says, great, now I have to take responsibility for the installation method, when we have a Canadian standard for that, we also have a building code with specific requirements, and we have all these different wall types that we're dealing with. And often we don't even know what kind of a wall type our building is going to be installed in. So we can't address all installation related matters in our installation instructions. So I think that is a real challenge. I don't think it's enough for the code to put that responsibility on manufacturers, because a lot more thinking has to go into it. And our buildings are no longer so simple that a single installation method always works in all cases. So I think Terry's identified a real concern here in BC, where there's not even a reference to the A440.4 standard.
So this would be a concern only in BC, you think?
Well, BC is the only province that does not include a reference to the A440.4 in Part 9.
Okay.
So in that sense, it's a BC only problem. But realistically, I think as we start designing very energy efficient buildings and highly insulated walls, that installation detailing, that where the window sits in the wall and the barriers and how the barriers connect to the window, should really be coming from the design team. I'm speaking now, how things should work in an ideal world. Okay. Because depending on where the insulation is placed, where they want the window to be in the wall, it can vary from building to building. So I think in terms of where the control barriers are in the wall and how they connect to the window, and the materials to be used to finish the rough opening from an air and water point of view, I think that kind of thing should be coming from designers as much as possible. In terms of shimming and anchoring, that is information that must come from the manufacturer. And that is something that I think every manufacturer's installation instructions should address, is shimming and anchoring. Now, the A440.4 has great diagrams for how to shim and anchor, especially where to put the shims for various kinds of products. And frankly, when I look at, I've been involved in several investigations of windows that were not installed correctly. And it's quite common for the installers to not know how to properly shim products. You don't shim a sliding door the way you shim a wood door. You don't shim a PVC door with side lights and things like that the way you would shim a window. If you've got different operating modes of windows, you shim them in different ways. So, if we had some kind of national installer training program, I think there are a lot of things in A440.4 that every window installer should know. Shimming and anchoring would be like number one. But in terms of control layers in the wall and connecting to the product, if it's not a pretty standard building design, then those should come from the design team, in my view.
Okay.
I don't know if that helps the answers the question.
Well, we'll see if Mark, if Terry needs more precision. So we have Sarb saying, well, thanks, and he wants to give feedback about the show too. He said, please continue with these tech talks. He says, I'm sure they are helping and getting the message out. So that's something I just wanted to mention you. So we have a couple more questions here from Terry, and I'll go to Russ. We have Russ Williams asking, how can we encourage window manufacturers to encourage a specific installation detail or compliance with the CSA code?
Well, this gets down to, if window manufacturers are supplying installation instructions, the instructions should reflect the relevant portions of the CSA 440 standard. And I think, if when manufacturers are supplying products that do not that are more complicated than a simple, individual fixed window or operable window, they should reference the shimming diagrams in the standard. And I think if a manufacturers could supply shimming instructions with their more complicated products, that would be helpful to prevent operating problems later in the field. And I was just looking back at that question here. His question seems to have disappeared from my screen.
No, okay, I'll bring it back. I have it here. So how can we? Yeah, here you go. Can you see it? So
just reread it then.
Yeah, how can we encourage window manufacturers to encourage specific installation details or compliance with the CSA code?
Yeah. So I think it's a I think we have a larger problem here.
Okay.
I think there's a body of knowledge that we need to make sure that people who install windows have. I think there is a need for a window installation training program that deals with issues that are critical in any kind of wall. You're always going to have to shim the product. You're going to have to anchor it. You're going to have to do certain other things that are covered quite well in the A440 standard. And I think there's a body of knowledge there that should be available as a training program, and that should be universal from coast to coast, because you've got gravity, you've got window frames, they're made of materials of vinyl, wood, other products, and you have to know how to correctly, support those products and shim them in place so that they're going to operate properly over the long term. And I think a lot of service calls come just from the products not being shimmed and anchored properly.
Okay.
And then there's a separate body of knowledge where you're getting into things that vary regionally, and that would be installation methods with respect to use of foam or not using foam, and where the and strategies for air tightness, and where you seal the product up for controlling air and water. And then that's kind of a separate body of knowledge that probably varies more across the country. And I think we need to, as an industry, find a way to put that information into the, pass that knowledge on to the relevant parties who are doing that kind of work.
Yeah.
And really, this is something that, maybe we can tackle at Fenestration Canada level, is to say, and we've talked a bit about the FIT program and so on, but I think we could put more work into trying to take that CSA 440 content and break out parts of it that apply everywhere from parts of it that are more local, and see how we can, get that knowledge into the hands of the people who install it, and what role manufacturers play in that versus the association versus training programs.
Yeah. So we have another question from Richard. I don't know if you answered it previously, so if you did, just let me know. So he's asking: a study has revealed most all peel stick membranes used on the subsill are not designed to hold standing water or provide a warranty for that use. Is a slope highly recommended?
I'm not sure what study Richard's referring to,
Okay.
because
You didn't see that?
I don't know that I can agree with that statement that most peel and stick membranes are not designed to hold standing water or provide a warranty for that use.
Okay.
Basically, if you should not be using products that are not intended to hold standing water. The building code requires that subsill flashing material to essentially have the properties of a roofing membrane. It is supposed to hold standing water. Okay. So there are a limited number of products that can do that, but those are the products that should be used if you're going to have standing water. So Now, should a sloped sill be used? I think there are a number of people, a number of building science folks who think, well, if you're going to have water accumulating in a cavity, you should slope that sill to let that water drain. But a sloped sill can be pretty problematic for installing products onto it. It's one thing if it's a 4x4 window. It's quite another thing if it's a 16 foot wide and 9 foot tall, mulled door and side light assembly. So I'm not sure that it's practical to standardize around a sloped sill, given the range of products we're installing today, and some of those are quite heavy, and we don't have standardized sloped sill components and sloped sill shims, and so that involves a lot of extra work for parties to adapt to, and how much benefit do you get from it.
So I just want to mention, so Richard specified the study he's talking about is the one through Red River Community College. So we heard about that study, I think. Don't know if you heard about it.
No, I have not heard about that.
Okay.
I know when I worked at RDH, we did a lot of study. We did a lot of testing of various materials used for membranes. Most of that testing was done for manufacturers who basically wanted to know, how their products compare with competing products and how their products perform. And we did find that there was a range of variation. Not all products performed as advertised. So yes, there are products that are sold that may not have those properties, but there are products that have been tried and true and used for a long time that and that are used as roofing materials. I'm thinking of things like these bituminous membranes or butyl type membranes that definitely have a proven track record. So
I think anyway we could have maybe Richard, or I'm not sure. I think it's a study that also done in partnership with Jan Eeks. I'm not sure 100%, but maybe we could have a show about that, because it seems to be a topic that we can expand on. And just to let you know, we have like 10 questions still, and a lot of people wanting to join in, so I'm just trying to expedite a little bit since we have maybe 10 minutes, so we'll try to go as fast as possible here. But just want to mention that if your question was not answered today, come back next week and we'll start with that. We'll have you ask your question again, and I strongly suggest for those who can to call in, because it's I think it's easier to create this back and forth, and it's easier for us to follow the questions. For what it's worth, we have Don saying that he agrees with what you just said about this last topic. But Richard says most membranes are designed for vertical application, not horizontal flat applications. So these are the two comments we got. Let me see here. We answered this one. So we have Terry with another question here. With very large door systems now more common, we're experiencing a serious issue with torch-on membrane, seal applications poorly applied, uneven lapped, etc. Under warmer condition, doors sink into this membrane, causing adjustment issues and sagging. He says that he's having difficulty pushing alternatives. Do you have any suggestions?
I discussed that with one of our roofing guys at RDH, because this kind of a question had come up. And yes, when you have, let's say, a door at a deck, the roofers are inclined to want to take that roofing membrane up and into that window rough opening. And that creates all kinds of problems for the window manufacturers, who now have to deal with these thick roofing products that are lapped. It can cause clearance problems. It can mean that if you have a nail flange product, that the flange, is now shimmed away by the roofing membrane at the bottom of the door, but and so the flange doesn't touch the wall at the top of the door. Basically, the answer was there's no need to bring that roofing membrane up into the rough opening, because if you use a bituminous blue skin membrane, that membrane is a roofing grade product. It performs to the requirements of a roofing membrane, and all they have to do is bring their roofing material up to the edge of that rough opening and terminate it. Don't roll it into the rough opening, just terminate it at the sill, and then counter flash over that with a peel and stick, which might have to be primed or something to engage that. But you know, this is kind of a trade coordination issue, and an issue that really, you know, unfortunately, you know, the manufacturers of large doors who are encountering this problem, I think, should be having this discussion with their builders up front to say that, listen, you can't just bring that roofing membrane into the rough opening with this product. And I mean, in addition to the problems I was aware of, you know, Terry's brought up the new one, that yes, if you've got these soft roofing membranes and you've got a heavy door with shims and that door sinks into that opening, then that's a problem. So certainly agree that this is a problem, and certainly is something that should be discussed with the builder. Okay. But, you know, when you've got competing trades here, each trade is doing what it thinks is the right thing to do, but sometimes one trade's work is causing problems for another one.
Okay. So as I said, we have maybe now like 6 minutes, so I'll just talk a little bit about the question of the day, give results. Right now we have 53% saying that main concerns they have would be that they are facing new installation challenges related to a demand for larger and more complicated products and more demanding performance expectations. So that would be the one that's the most popular today. So whoever's looking at the feed right now can see all the other results, but that's the main one. Anything to say about that,
Al? Yeah, well, that is maybe something we would want to focus on, whether on another show or with another initiative.
For sure.
Because I think it would be good to try and get a better handle on identifying more specifically what those challenges are. To what extent is it the handling of the products? To what extent is it the shimming? Okay. And installation? Is it installation problems related to incorrect shimming of these large products? Is it more to do with the handling? Is it to do with other interface issues? And to what extent, because we've kind of lumped a few ideas into this question, and to what extent is it the challenges now of dealing with different kinds of walls, and now the product is, instead of being a flange mounted product on the exterior, being in the middle of the wall and having to use a strap anchor. So I think maybe this is a topic to let's try to break this down into more detail and maybe pick it up for next week's show.
Yeah, for sure, because we have a lot of questions and stuff we can touch on next few weeks, actually, which is great. I want to, maybe if we have a couple more minutes, I have Alan here that asked the question, and we also have a couple comments that are saying, like, is it possible? So we have, Pat Flannery saying, would it be a good idea for Fencan to actually operate a training course, maybe with a college? We had several comments like that. Don that says that back in 2004 at CWDMA there was a video done for some installation methods. So maybe one could be done for like basic window configurations as a starting point. So I just want to mention these are all really good ideas, Pat. Just so you know, like, we do have a training committee right now looking at different options for training courses or partnerships. So yes, we're looking into that. And to answer Don's question, I mean, that we would need to check with these committees and Al, but I'm sure you're taking great notes of this comment here, Al, and maybe we could go look if it's something that's doable.
Yes, I hope you can capture a record of all the questions that we can discuss after the call.
Yes.
Yeah.
So now I'll go with Alan's question, and if we can do that pretty quickly, I might have another one for you that we might have time to answer. So Alan's question is, with the CSA 440.4 being a very technical document and practices and methods varying across the country, could FENCAN provide a checklist of basic principles that needs to be adhered to for window and door installation? So and as he was typing, he thinks that you kind of suggested something like this. So this, this all goes within this, like, what can FENCAN do to help installers? Al, anything to say about that?
Well, I think there are things we could do as an industry association. I mean, who else is going to give direction here, if not us, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we have a situation where we don't control who installs the windows in most cases. Other parties are doing that. We have good technical resources, but we don't have an easy way to make that body of knowledge available to those installers. But there may be things we can do as an association to tackle that. And actually, I think the feedback we're getting from this call is something that we should maybe discuss, convene the installation committee to look at that. Because I think it seems to me that there are parts of what the great content we have in A440.4 that we could extract and make available to people in forms that are outside of that document. We could probably take chunks of content from there and put it into some kind of online training resource. Why couldn't we have shimming diagrams, for example, from A440 or based on A440 available on our website, right?
Okay.
Installation tips and tricks. There's probably information we could put out there that would help to address these things. Even the question Terry had about the roofing membranes being brought into the rough opening. Potentially we could address those kinds of topics and propose alternative ways of doing things that might help to simplify things. And if we could direct the builders and installers to an online resource where they could get quality information that is, based on the standard that we have, there should be no controversy about something that's in the A440 standard for the most part anyway. And maybe we can make educational resources available to help our members, but also that they can say, look, to install our products, we want you to, they got to be anchored by A440, and you can see how to do that on the Fenestration Canada website,
Yeah, well,
so that's something we could explore.
For sure. So we're out of time. I think I don't want to put you on the spot here, but what would you say if we did follow up on this episode next week? So basically keep talking about, keep the same topic and try to answer the questions that we didn't have time to answer this week. And so I don't know, are you okay with that?
I think that would be a good idea, Steph.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So let's do that. So now you guys know that we expect to see you next week with your questions ready. I'll say it again. If you want to be, if you want to talk to us directly, it helps answering more questions. But I'm really happy with the result here and with the participation. So I think the more we're gonna do this week after week, the worse it's gonna get for us. The worse it's gonna get for us, and especially for you. So pretty happy with the turnout. So, Al, did you have anything else to say before next week?
No, like I say, I was thinking as well. There's so many questions, we didn't get to them all today, and the feedback we're getting from our members is very helpful. For example, some of the questions that were asked here, I had not anticipated they would come up. And so this I think we're touching a nerve here, and I think, learning more about the specific kinds of questions that our members have and specific challenges, I think let's see what we can do as an association to help our members with that.
Sure. So thanks again. Thanks for joining us today, and I think that's it for Tech Talks this week. I'm gonna thank our sponsor again, so Quanix Building Products. Thanks again, and see you all next week.
See you next week, folks.
Welcome to another Fenestration Canada podcast.
You are a member and want to be part of the live recording of Tech Talks? Easy. Visit fenestrationcanada.ca and sign up for the next show.